No sound.
Good problems, isn't it?
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening, Ken.
It's good to see everybody again on the Sabbath.
Good to see you.
We got Doug's going to join us. We had a couple of technical issues, but hopefully he can get it back on for us. In the meantime, we're gonna start out. If Dr. Hicks would take us out, that'd be great.
Okay. This is a joke we got from Gary. Bruce Cheatney, about 90 years of age, was stopped by the police around 2 a.m. while he was asked why was he driving so late at night all by himself. Bruce replied, on my way to a lecture on alcohol abuse, the effects it has on the human body, as well as smoking and staying out late. The officer says, really, give me a break. Who would schedule around 2 a.m. at night? And he replied, that would be my wife.
My wife.
Looks like Doug's going to be able to join us. That's good.
That laugh is scary. Well, I wanted to start off by taking maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes on world affairs. Well, as you probably know, Boko Haram of Nigeria claimed their loyalty to ISIS. You know, that's the global caliphate. Libya, or some group in Libya, not all, but some groups in Libya, have claimed their allegiance to the global caliphate. And they, I found this out in the Jewish news. American media hasn't reported it. You know why they cut off the heads of 21 Christians on the beach in Libya? Well, you remember when bin Laden, their patron saint, was buried at sea. You know, that would have been the Mediterranean Sea. And they put that on international television. Well, they wanted to mix the Christian blood and Laden's blood. You know, because Libya's on the Mediterranean Sea as well. Oh, that's interesting. But I want to look at some things about ISIS and Islamic radicals beyond the 5 pillars of Islam. The radicals are different in some ways. I want to mention here that many of our listeners need to be aware of. June 29, 2014, al-Baghdadi, when he was released from a jail that our army ran in Iraq, we should have had him in Gitmo, but I guess not. He established a caliphate. Actually, he told our guards there, I'll see you in New York. Anyway, and he says this caliphate is successor to the Muhammad Caliphate, global leader of Islam. Also, ISIS says Sayyid Qutabi, and I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but he's intellectual godfather, radical Islam. He wrote a book called Milestones. It was a primer for their patron saint, Osama bin Laden, as well as Baghdad. They believe, this is in the book, that everyone should have the opportunity, every person on earth should have an opportunity to live in a truly Islamic nation governed solely by Sharia law. Sharia law imposed. Are you all getting this echo that I get?
Yeah, I can't even.
You're getting the echo. Well, Google doesn't want this out. Let's see. We improve the equity. Hey, the echo's gone. Can you hear me? Can anybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Good. Okay. They also claim that there are no innocent victims in the West, because we support governments which do things in the Islamic world or oppose the caliphate. We're not innocent victims. So therefore, killing us is not a bad thing, the way they view it. Also, they believe that moderate Muslims should be attacked and destroyed. Now, I'm going to see if I can quote this exactly out of the article. Moderate Muslims ought to be attacked. Strive hard against unbelievers and the hypocrites, those are moderate Muslims, and be unyielding to them. Their abode is hell, and evil is their destination. I thought I would just tell all of others in the world that their rivals, religious rivals, are going to hell, so they're going to send them there quick. This is a minister who was very fond of pure, hot horseradish. Always kept a bottle of it on his dining room table. Once at dinner, he offered a guest, well, you can have some radish too if you like, who took a big spoonful and swallowed it. The guest let out a huge gasp. Ah! When he was finally able to speak, and they poured some water and milk down his throat, he choked out, "I've heard many ministers preach hellfire, but you're the first one I've met who passes out a sample on his dining room table." That laugh might be scarier than hell itself. You might wonder why are the moderate Muslims who don't support the radicals, they believe maybe you should use more persuasive jihad to get people to join Islam, that don't support that, they're scared too. By the way, if someone martyrs himself killing the infidels or the hypocrites, he's guaranteed life in paradise, with 70 virgins, and he can take 70 of his relatives, including his mom, with him. And he doesn't have to be good. He's guaranteed. Otherwise, you're not guaranteed paradise. Also, when ISIL crucifies, beheads, or burns alive its victims, it is committing atrocities to gain public notoriety. During the first 100 years of Islam, its armies achieved domination of the entire Middle East and the where Islam was started. By using such practices, they call it shock and awe. They say the shock and awe atrocities cause larger populations to be so frightened they will abandon all resistance and submit to Islam. And Islam means submission. And that's why they publicize their atrocities. Because you would think, well, somebody would hide such horrible atrocities, but they publicize them because they want to scare everybody to death so that people will, in the Middle East, will give in. And it has had some success. So those regular Iraqi soldiers threw away their uniforms, ran off their weapons, and ran like chickens when they heard ISIL was coming. And you might ask yourself, why would young people want to join? Many Western youths and Islamic youths and non-Islamic are joining ISIL. Here's the way this one expert writes it up. He says, what's the appeal? Why are they still growing? the young people that are coming to them have rejected the materialism which Western society presents them with. They believe democracy to be heresy, and they want laws that come straight out of the Quran. That's their version of the Bible. They reject Western-style education. By the way, a lot of Western-style education denigrates Western civilization. So by politically correct education, we actually have helped our enemies by denigrating our own history. They reject Western-style education, choosing to indoctrinate themselves with Sharia law. They eschew material comforts, and they believe, deprivation is moving them toward spiritual paradise. I sort of understand it. I'm not saying it's right, but I can understand that kind of thinking. And we in the West don't understand what's going on, but it is very much religious. We might ask ourselves, if we don't understand the core tenets of the King of the South, which is Islam, we won't understand them. But now that I understand at least some of their core tenets, I can see why in the end time, that last war that's pictured by Daniel, why the King of the South, some caliphate or some other, whichever side wins out, it may not be ISIL, maybe others, whoever wins out the fight to create this caliphate or imamship, whoever wins out is going to push at Europe because they believe it's their goal to dominate. And we always thought they'd use oil, but who knows? They might have quite a few nuclear weapons by then. They might even do it the old-fashioned conventional way. And then, of course, the King of the North is going to come in strong and take over. But I can see the stage, next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, I can see the stage being set. What do you think, Gary?
I think keep your eye on the Vatican and see where they come into all this at. Well, that's going to be my opinion.
Yeah, the Pope just said that he only expects to be around for a couple more years, and he'll probably retire like the other Pope. So I don't know. It sounds a little strange, but yeah.
He retires, there'll be three.
Yeah.
That would be a trinity of popes.
Yeah, so to speak, yeah. But what you say about the King of the South being religiously and ideologically motivated to push at the King of the North, or to push at the northern European countries, it makes sense. It kind of puts things into perspective because 20 years ago that prophecy didn't make much sense to somebody. Why would they even attempt that? Well, now with this reborn zeal to spread their religion throughout the world, it's kind of obvious they're going to do it out of ideology. So, and that's a pretty powerful driving force for a people, especially a whole group of nations.
And I believe Baghdadi believes that book that said every human being on earth should live under Sharia law and have an opportunity to try for the Islamic paradise. I mean, I believe that they believe it, that they're motivated by it. Make sure I say that clearly. I believe that that's what's motivating them. And you realize religious warriors are the most dangerous. But see, it could also happen in Europe too. In Europe, they could be worshiping the beast and his religious system, and the King of the South could be worshiping the caliphate and his religious system. They both could be motivated by religion.
Yeah, you know what? And the more you think about that, you got that's kind of the more you think about that, the more interesting that scenario gets.
Now that young fellow who was one of the Boston bombers, the surviving bomber that they're putting on trial right now, he said that his words were that when ISIS looks down your gun barrel as you're coming at them, they see heaven.
Yeah. So I mean that just yeah, exactly. So they
Well, the quicker their death comes, the quicker their ticket to heaven is what they're saying.
there's less fear. There's some saying about being in battle. I heard it somewhere today that if you're in a before you go into war, if you go with the attitude that you're already dead, you're a better warrior because you have less fear. And less fear means you'll do things and you'll react different than if you're cowering in fear. And that's even a more motivating uh, uh, driving force that not only you're already dead, but you get a free ticket to paradise in their eyes. So by killing them, by dying, you're doing them a favor. It's difficult to defeat that. You have to defeat it by you have to utterly defeat it. You have to wipe it out.
Well, the word that conjures up in my mind is fanaticism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fanatical about it.
And Winston Churchill got in trouble, at least when he would later, people quote him later, for saying that. He said the fanaticism is outrageous. And he was right, of course. And that was in 1992.
You have to defeat that before battle. You have to find some way to get in their head, so to speak, such as the British generals that made it well known that when he slaughtered several Muslims or hundreds of them, that he would take and bury them in a mass grave, and he would cut swine open and pour the pig blood and the pig parts all over their bodies so that they would never attain their paradise. And when they know that's coming, then you've kind of got that edge knocked off of them wanting to die.
Yeah. By the way, Blackjack Pershing in the Philippines, in the Mindanao Island, this Islamic, which is still having trouble to this day, when he was putting down the revolution, whatever it was there, he had all his men coat their bullets in pig fat.
Yeah.
And
I remember that. Yeah, you got to use the intel you have against whoever your enemy is. You use whatever intel you have to shut it down. To get, like Doug said, get in their head and shut it down.
But that's the world that we face, and the fact that they gained the group in Nigeria and in Libya, it's metastasizing like a disease.
Yeah.
And now, they may be defeated by other forces in the Middle East. They still have a lot of powerful enemies. But all I'm saying is, it just has that weird feeling like a cancer spreading. Don't you get that feeling?
It's definitely not being retarded or beaten back. It's definitely spreading, and it's not meeting any resistance. In fact, the leader of the United States is actually kind of ignoring it and putting their head in the sand and saying, look, it's not really a religious war. This is just a few fanatics. If you're just saying it's just a few fanatical people and you're not addressing that there is a major issue and that these people have one goal and one goal only, then they're going to just keep spreading because there's no one out there to shut them down.
It's going to be tough, like you say, if you don't understand them. I know we'll be finding out probably the next couple of months. The Iranians are, at least that's what they say in our newspaper, I don't know if you can believe it, helping us and the Iraqis, who are also Shiites, fight ISIL, which is Sunni. And that religious divide is a big part of the fight, too. And I guess we'll find out how the Iranians do in fighting them. So I don't know. It's hard to predict when you're dealing with crazy groups like that which one's going to win out. But as we move over to our main topic, the parable of the unjust steward and its deeper meanings, maybe we ought to turn over to Gary first. Would you like to start that discussion, Gary, about the contextual background of the stewards in Jesus Christ's time?
Well, yeah, I'm not well studied on it, but in general, the concept is, I believe, that we are to be good stewards of God's resources, of course, because in one way of looking at it, that is an investment in our own eternity. I was a little curious on the word mammon. I wanted to look and see exactly what I could find out about that, and I'm going to read from Holman's Bible Dictionary, and some of the definition it says is in general use it was a personification of riches as an evil spirit or deity, indicating the evil influence of wealth. The word was not used in the Old Testament, but Jesus did use it. In the Sermon on the Mount is where he made that quite famous statement, you cannot serve God and mammon.
Of the wealth. Kind of think of a giant dollar sign with an evil grin on its face or something. Mammon. By the way, part of the context that you might not know when you first read it, especially in the King James, is if you go to Exodus 22:25, and in the laws and judgments that Moses gave Israel, Israelites were not allowed to charge interest, especially to fellow Israelites, and especially to the poor. And by the way, Israel was one of the few nations, I believe the only one in ancient times that had such a law. And the God's purpose in that law was to keep the powerful and wealthy from keeping the poor in perpetual servitude and poverty. Matter of fact, some of the other laws they had that helped with that were the land laws. Like every 50 years, regardless of how much debt they ran up, the land went to would be paid off, so that you wouldn't get this perpetual servitude. And I was thinking, we don't, in the modern world, we don't have quite the same thing to the degree they had it then. But and not too many years ago, people that used to work in coal mining communities where the coal mine company owned their houses, and they would go to the company store and they would buy stuff on credit, and of course interest charged, and they would always be perpetually in debt to the coal mining company, or sharecroppers who didn't own the land, so they had to pay a fee, but then they'd go to the owner's store, and they would always be in perpetual debt. It was like keeping them poor. That was why God did not allow the Israelites, especially the wealthy ones, to charge interest when they loaned to the poor, to help finance their farming and whatever. So the question is, how did the rich people get around that law? One of the things you'll learn about the Pharisees is certain laws, especially dealing with money, they found ways to get around it, like the Corban law. So here's what they did in the days of Jesus Christ. They would hire a steward. We might call him a financial manager servant, but this financial manager servant would be the one who actually, they just gave him a certain amount of money and capital, and he did all the dirty details and arranged for the interest payments. And that way the rich man had plausible deniability if anybody ever accused him of breaking that law in Exodus. He could say, hey, I didn't tell the steward to charge interest. I know nothing. The stewards had kind of a phantom record-keeping system that would make it even harder to prove anything in court. So, but yet the reason this parable was effective when Christ gave it was because everybody knew that's what was really going on.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting how they're doing the same thing today? I mean, that's how our financial system works pretty much. I mean, is money being made off of money and manipulating the markets, and it's pretty much a lot of unsavory manipulation of funds that people are using to keep this economic system going, not necessarily hard work and innovation and entrepreneurship, but manipulating of funds by the trillions of dollars.
Well, speaking of the stock market, let's relate to the subject a little bit. From what I understand, the Fed is artificially keeping interest rates low. I mean, that may seem the opposite, but in capitalism, inflation grows 2 or 3% a year, so you pretty much expect to have minimum interest of your bank account to keep even. Well, they've kept it so low that you get nothing out of your money in the bank. So investors put all their money in the stock market, the only place they can get growth. But the odd thing about the stock market is some of the growth there is real entrepreneurial achievements, by certain products. But most of it has little to do with true financial success. It's like a bubble, because the rest of the world, including the euro was like a 12-year low versus the dollar. Europe is still in financial trouble, and other parts of the world in various degrees of trouble. It's almost like there's an artificial financial bubble in the world, and the stock market, for the most part, is benefiting by it. But you can sense that anything that's artificially being puffed up is going to one day get pricked like a balloon.
Yeah, you're right. That's exactly it. In fact, there's a financial guy on a local radio program around here does something where he's warning about this, and he calls his theme is the economy of one. In other words, rely on your own self for your financial. Don't rely on all this, investors, and you have an economy of one so that it is sustainable. But about the interest rates, one of the effects of the low interest rates, and it could be intentionally held low, is because all the money we're printing, we have to pay interest on it. And if the interest rate is so low that they can just keep they could just keep printing this money, and we can loan it back to ourselves, or the Feds loan it back to us, the Federal Reserve, and then you can just keep borrowing money and churning money until the interest rates go up just a little bit. It doesn't have to be much. Once that happens, the interest on all this debt we've accumulated for the last 6, 8 years, 10 years is going to come back to break us, because it doesn't take much with the numbers we're talking, the trillions of dollars we're printing and borrowing it won't take a very high percentage rate to just bring everything down, burst that bubble you were talking about.
I watched a DVD by somebody in the church or connected. He was complaining about the $9 trillion of national debt being too high. Now it's double that and climbing. I guess financial skullduggery, some of that came out of the housing bubble. They hit the bad, toxic loans, the people on Wall Street and higher real estate guys and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They hit the toxic loans carefully so they could pass them to people higher up the line until finally the bubble burst. And that was the burst at the end of 2007. The question is, financial manipulation is a dangerous thing. To the average person, since we don't have the same problem in minutes, like payday loan sharks, they maybe aren't as dangerous as the ones in the Bible, but they're pretty bad. If you're poor and you got to go to a payday loan shark and they're charging 24% interest, you will never get out from under, probably. You see what the problem? And in some place you have to put up your car title.
That's the same thing as the credit card trap. So they have it set up so many of them do. If you miss one payment, that if you're late with one payment, it triggers an increase in the rate, and it gets up so high that you can never get out of it.
Yep. These are the kinds of things they were doing at Christ Day, or at least some variety of such. And the one thing you'll notice in Luke is that whole section around Luke 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 is all about financial parables. And I think the Pharisees knew, they sensed that this was aimed at them and that they were the guilty party. And I just like in Luke 16:14, where Christ said, and I'm just going to read part of it, Luke 16:14. The Pharisees who loved money, and when Christ said they loved money, I think he means the inordinate, inappropriate love of money, mammon, you know, heard all of this, you know, all those parables, including this one, and they were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of men, but God knows your heart." That's the New International Version. But can you see their heart was evil and greedy? And that's why they hated these financial parables that Christ is giving.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense why they wanted him crucified.
Yeah. I mean, they love money, and I mean, they also love the pretense of being religious giants and, you know, people who love God and all that sort of thing. They loved, let me put it, they love God. They love the idea of everybody thinking how righteous and godly they were, but they really love money, which is understandable. I mean, that's a common thing that everybody, you know. Don't you agree that all of us have that same pressure
Absolutely.
Same pressure to what?
to love money?
Okay, yeah.
And you could be as poor as a church mouse and still have an inordinate love of money.
Maybe the correlation that we need to bring into this thing is to remember that, of course, steward is synonymous with ambassador, so to speak. Christ was talking to and about Jews and people that were supposed to be godly people in the community of that day. And maybe we need to take a closer look at maybe our own churches and other groups that take the money that is sent to do God's work and create family dynasties and decide to build a super tower, you know, something that'll be a monument to them when they die, you know, and other things, instead of producing what is godly in getting a true work out to the world.
By the way, this is interesting. It's a little bit of what you said, but I think I even know one particular person who you have in mind, this giant university, the big tower. But even if it's not the guy you're thinking of, I know what you mean. A lot of charities have been accused of having such high administrative costs that their money is not going where it should go. Now, I read this. I'm hoping this is accurate. That the Samaritan Purse is a charity, and I think Mercury One also, where they do give a high percentage of their money to the causes that they claim to give it to. Because I remember I gave some money, I think it was to Samaritan Purse to help the Christians. You remember the Christian sect that was hiding on the mountain from ISIL last year? And they had, a lot of the women had been raped, kidnapped, and men had been killed, and they were going to kill a bunch of them, and at least tens of thousands of them had escaped to this mountain, and the UN had some tents. And believe, and this is what I saw on one of those cable, Samaritan Purse is one of the few outfits that was getting food and water and supplies to them, which kind of surprised me. I thought the UN and America and everybody would be pouring supplies in, but I guess it's a dangerous place to go. And thanks to them and the Kurds, who I guess were next door and helped fight ISIS back, at least some of those people got out of there alive.
That's great.
And I felt good about giving a bit of money to Samaritan Purse for a good cause. And you know, you never really know, I guess, anymore with any charity, but you hope it's true anyway, what they say.
Right. Right. You do your research and then you give, and then, you know, you do it with a good heart, and it, whether it gets there or not, it doesn't matter. It matters what the condition of your heart when you're giving it. So
You do your part.
you do your part, and but if they steal and they manipulate and they whatever, it's on them. They'll have to deal with that.
Ken, could you read 16, the key verses from 5 to 8, and maybe if you've got a better translation than the King James, some better translations sound better than the King James in this particular one.
What book are we in?
Luke 16.
Luke 16. Okay, that's what I thought.
Roughly 4 to 8, somewhere in that general area.
I can do that. Okay, let's see. If we start, okay, I have resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his master's debtors to him, and he said to the first, "How much do we owe you, my master? Do we owe you, my master?" And he said, 100 measures of oil. For he said to him, "Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50." And he said to another, "And how much do you owe?" So he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, "Take your bill and write 80." So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generations than the sons of light.
You know, when you read that, one commentary said the reason oil had like a 50% interest rate or double was because olive oils were a more risky crop to sponsor and finance, because the weather and even the oils may not even if it grows, may not produce the best oil. But even still, you can see he's taking the interest and the profits away from the owner and giving it back to the farmers and ranchers, and he's buying friends. So that even though the owner basically told the steward, "You're not getting enough profit for me for the money I'm putting in," or accused him of something like that, "You're going to be fired." So before the door hits him and he's kicked out, he is making friends, and Christ is complimenting him on making friends in the right places. And that's something that he says we need to be able to do more of, like the unjust steward.
Yep.
What do you think, Gary?
I don't know, really don't know what to add to that.
In other words, the unjust steward was being complimented on his cleverness, and we Christians just aren't as clever in making friends in the spiritual world like this guy is making friends in the world of mammon and money. And we need to learn how to get better at doing what worldly people do. They're good at making friends in the right places. Also, when you read, would you read verses 10 and 11, Ken?
Sure. It says, "He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much, and he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches?"
And you think least. In one context, really, material things are the least things. They're not the most important thing. People just think they're the most important thing, but they're really not. Stuff, You know, we got a whole basement and garage full of stuff. Now, I really don't, but not compared to some people, really.
In other words, using your
We
money
got so
to
much
network
stuff
with
in the
people.
garage, they can't even put the car in. And I mean that literally.
So what he's saying is kind of use your money to also network with the people you deal with on a daily basis, not just put it in the stuff that's just going to get old and outdated and useless.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, because that's what stuff does. And money, you know, money is important, of course, but it's not. But it's the things. You know, if God can learn to trust you with the least stuff, then later He can trust you with much, 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 much more important things. I was talking to a banker, and we were just joking around a little bit, and we were saying, you know, it might actually be easier to give money to God than to give yourself to God, and really try to repent and grow spiritually.
Well, yeah, your heart and yourself are much more valuable than money anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, he covers that in verse 12. I think this really highlights the whole conversation there. He says, and if you cannot be trusted with things that belong to someone else, who will give you things of your own?
So this is all coming down to placing too much value on wealth or misusing it. And the fact that you should be a good steward of the resources that God has given you and place the value on His Word.
Yeah, that's a good summation.
And I like what you said, Gary, the resources God has given you. Because really, materialism, material things and money belong to God. He's just allowing us to have some of it and use it for a little while.
Yep.
Because God, one way of thinking about it is God has given you that money to start with. Remember one time my old friend Tom Holtum said that we were talking about tithing and about our resources, and he said, well, it's already God's, but He just directs that we give a certain amount of it back to Him as a man.
And He's doing it for our benefit. You know, God, it says in the Bible, the gold in the hills and all the cows and the fields belong to God. He has everything, I mean, obviously, but He's allowing us because He wants us to grow.
Yeah, I like the term laying up treasures in heaven.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, doesn't He just want to give us things basically on this earth so that we understand, or we should be understanding that He did give them to us, and that there's nothing that we can get ourselves, that everything we have belonged to God before it ever belonged to us and before He decided to share it with us. And then we should be sharing our life with Him and understanding and giving thanks that He allowed us to share, or He allowed Himself to be shared with us.
No, that's very true, and I think we need to remember that on a daily basis. The noise of this world is difficult to get through. That and get back to the point where there's God our Father, Jesus Christ, and us. Everything else in between is noise that separates us from them, and that I think it's just hard to. We got to remember that on a daily basis and try to push back. And that's what the Sabbath is for: is to get us out of that, get us away from that noise, and get us with brethren, with each other, speaking about things that we read or we study or we hear of God, and get us do a weekly refresh on getting us back to what's really important. Pull us out of the world and get us back to what's really important. And we need that refresh every single week. If
This
you
life
do,
is this life is a training session. You know, sometimes I look at it as our human life as high school, and if we can manage to be a good enough person and graduate, then we go on to the University of the Millennium, U of M. And if
you had to stick that in there.
yes,
I like that.
University of the Millennium, and if you
Yeah, I like that.
graduate there and get your and make it through, then you go on to become a true professional.
Anybody that doesn't know it, Gary's from Michigan, so
No,
he had to get the U of M in there. Yeah,
nobody would have guessed.
nobody would have guessed. Yeah, well, but I think that's true. I mean, and these examples, like taking a closer look, and we could probably even take a closer look at this. Tell us how we should treat the resources given to us, allowed for us to have, and how to treat them, and how to learn from how we're, learn how we are supposed to treat these resources and what's truly important.
That's right. We need to learn how to use them and to get it down right, and treat it as though it is a course that you're taking that you need to pass with the very highest marks.
That's a good analogy. I like that.
You know, you go to Matthew 6:33, where Christ basically says that our first priority should be the kingdom of God more than anything else, and more than materialism. Should be the kingdom of God. Then you go to Romans 18 to 23, where he says the whole world is waiting for the birth of the sons of God. Then you realize, what is the most important thing that God's work is doing on this planet right now? It's building the sons of God, because that's a spiritual creation. That's with, because we got free moral agency, evil influences, human nature, and yet still letting God, try to make us grow to be more spiritual. That is God's really greatest work. Far more valuable than growing tomatoes, building cars, building new fur coats, whatever, sewing fur coats. It's the greatest work on the planet, the work of God. And God's us to use our money to help the most important thing, the work of God.
And we need to remind each other of that every chance we get. Because the noise of the world is so loud and it so engrosses everything around us. Everything we hear, we see is focused on pulling us away from God. That one day, that 24 hours is what we have. And it should be more than that, but this is commanded that we take 24 hours because he knows how hard it is to stay this course without coming out of the world for one day a week.
He tells us in Romans 8:13.
And you look at
down below Jim. He says, "For if you live after the flesh, you shall die. But if you through the Spirit mortify the deeds of the body, you shall live." That pretty well wraps it up.
Yep.
Good point.
It's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven.
Did we cover verse 13? What was it? Dr. Ricks, did we touch on verse 13?
I was getting ready to say that in the end. But let me make one comment before I get to Luke 16:13. The one comment I was going to make, Gary was saying about how difficult it was for rich people to come in God's kingdom. Obviously, some do, of course. It's not impossible. But I think as you get older, aren't we blessed that we're not wealthy?
Yes.
I don't don't know if I could make it if I had money. I don't know what I'd be like. I'm bad enough as it is without it.
Well, when we had the big time downturn in the economy, it didn't have much effect on me. I didn't have any money anyway.
It's like my mom used to tell me. My mom used to tell me, said, yeah, when I was a kid, you know, real small, said they told me we were in a depression, but we didn't know it.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? That's a good point. You know what? Let me bring this up real quick. Years ago, it was probably more so than it is now. My dad grew up dirt poor, but he didn't know it when he was a kid.
That's the thing.
When you're a little child, and we're supposed to be as little children, he was dirt poor, but he didn't know it. He had fun. He hung out. Nowadays, if you're poor, there's somebody out there going to let you know it. I was pretty poor growing up, and when I was real little, of course, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, I didn't know it. But once you get into, grade school and get up into grades, people start letting you know it. But when you're very young, you can be dirt poor. You don't know it.
Yeah.
Money doesn't mean a thing.
Yeah.
I was the youngest of 4 brothers, and I never got a new coat because they kept passing them down to me. And I thought that was normal. I thought that's what everybody did. I didn't care. I didn't know.
My dad would say, "You had a coat."
Yeah. I had one older brother and a cousin that was older, and the cousin, my uncle and aunt, both had real good jobs, when we was growing up, and they had pretty good money, Well, I was just tickled to death to get his hand-me-downs because his stuff was better than anything we could afford to buy new from the store.
Look, this is something that the generation, and even my generation and generations need to know. My grandfather was from down in Tennessee. They were so poor, he had to wear clothes, whatever he could get. And I think there's a picture of him with one of his sister's dresses on when he was like 2 or 3 years old or 4 years old. That's all he had. That's all they had. That is dirt poor. He didn't, that's all they had. So people need to understand that. Nobody has it that bad, not in this country now. But
the thing of it was, we were just as happy.
Yeah. And in the picture is his playing. He's out with his, his sisters and whatever, his family, and they're out out their dirt backyard, playing. Somebody they knew had a camera or something, took a picture and gave it to him. But that's poor. And there's someone out there that would tell us that ain't poor. I can tell you what really is like being poor. So the last thing you should be worried about and fretting about nowadays is what you have or what you don't have.
Exactly.
What we need to worry about that we don't have would be God's Holy Spirit. That's the only thing that I'm concerned about not having.
That's the only concern we need to have.
Or losing
it. Losing it, yes. Losing it.
It's such a bad attitude. But, we're lucky that we're not rich. We don't have all that money to spoil us rotten.
Absolutely.
Verse 13, Luke 16:13, near the very end of the parable, Christ makes the statement, you can't serve 2 masters, mammon, materialism, which is a false god, or the real God. You're going to have to choose. It's either mammon or the true God. Use your money to serve the work of God and the true God, and not mammon and materialism. And everybody's going to have to make that choice. In a world, advertisers are pushing nothing but get more stuff for yourself. More.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
And they're good
the
at
one
it.
who
Right?
dies with the most toys wins. That's the bumper stickers you see. That's what you see.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about what we're going to tackle next week. It might be important to encourage people to try to make it, if at all possible. We're going to try to make it possible too. It's next Friday. We're going to talk about why, and maybe a little bit of how, why we should do a self-examination before the New Testament Passover, which is April 2nd. I know that'll be like 2 weeks in advance, but people need a little time to get themselves ready and start thinking about it, because God requires that kind of self-examination before the New Testament Passover, which will be Thursday, April 2nd.
Yep, I think that's perfect. Yep, I think that's perfect for next week. I just wanted to share something.
Think about it. Get their brains ready. And
What'd you say? Doug, what'd you say, Doug?
I was just saying, I don't know about everyone else, but I'm starting this Sabbath on. I was just saying, I'm starting this Sabbath with my sermons on beginning stages of putting sin out of our life, recognizing sin. Do we celebrate sin, or do we actually try to put sin away? I mean, I think we need to start now, or last week. We can't just do it just during the days of unleavened bread. We need to start as soon as the Feast of Tabernacles is over.
Yeah, that's another thing. We got to start cleaning all the leavening out of the house.
What was that?
No bread. No bread. That was
Drum City.
I got about 3 loaves in the freezer, so I tied a string around my fingers. Don't buy any more bread.
Yeah, we got some loaves of bread we can give away too.
Yeah, I'll put on 10 pounds between now and then and try to eat up all the bread we got in the freezer.
That's a good excuse. I haven't thought that one before.
I'm bulking up for the Passover. For the days of unleavened bread. Well, I just wanted to I wanted to share something real quick. Friends of the programs have sent us from Australia. Hey, Randy and Elaine sent us kind of an update or a bulletin. There was a recent study that was found that women who carry a little extra weight live longer than the men who mention it. I just thought I would share that with everybody. So you might want to take that to heart.
Got a point.
Oh, here we go. Oh my, I don't think I ever got one of those before. All right, so that's for next week. All right, that's what we're going to do next week. Anything else you want to tack over before we go? Dr. Ricks?
No, thank you. I'm ready.
Nope, all right.
Ready, I think.
I'm going to try and play the intro then, and hopefully it works. Let's see here. We'll give it a shot anyway.
We're happy you could make it, and so glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear.
I don't know, can you hear it?
Yeah.
I can.
All right.
And until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.
I gotta
Good
learn.
night, everybody.
Hey, Ken. Good night.